Episode number 4 of Life After a Suicide Attempt. This series has a purpose of eradicating and eroding any shame and stigma that's preventing suicide recovery and preventing support from going to those affected directly or indirectly. Last week's episode focused on the experience of me being at the AFSP Out of the Darkness Suicide Prevention Walk at the community college I went to. It showed how in the midst of marchers walking in mutual mission, how we couldn't remain in solitude. We were locked in with community. And it showed that so many of us were affected by the same affliction. Tonight's episode features more quotes and statistics that further go to show that none of us are alone in this, that others have gone through this, and that we mustn't remain in solitude. The first quote comes from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and it states that no complete count is kept of suicide attempts in the U.S. Why is that? Because there's so much shame and stigma attached to reporting a suicide attempt. Because what happens after you report it? What happens is that you could be sent to a hospital, put on medication, you might have time out from school, from work. It disrupts your life so much, and you're also labeled. You're also labeled with both your mental affliction and also mental abnormalities and your mental affliction. You're labeled with that, so people are less likely to report all the suicide attempts that happen. According to the National Alliance on Mental Health, it states that approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S., 43.8 million, experience mental illness in a given year. Now, I know with me walking in downtown Chicago, I pass by hundreds, if not thousands of people every day. If I compare that statistic to the amount of people that I encounter every day, that means that there are enough people that experience mental illness in a given year to fill up a small theater, which is a powerful visual showing that so many of us are affected by it, that we mustn't remain in solitude, that we mustn't remain within the shame and stigma of not seeking recovery or not giving support to those that are affected. According to the National Institute for Mental Health, it states that suicide was the third leading cause of death among individuals between age 10 and 14, and the second leading cause of death among individuals between age 15 and 34. In this article, I also found that it's a prevalent cause of death between individuals that are in the later stages of life. It affects all demographics of age, also of race and ethnicity and socioeconomic background. It affects all backgrounds. It should not be as stigmatized and as isolating as it is, because it affects anyone and everyone. Looking at the ages 10 and 14, those are between the ages of puberty, between the ages of synaptic pruning in our brains, which shows that it's entrenched within our brains. We're stigmatizing this without remembering that mental illness means this is biology, this is chemistry. This is more than just, it's more than just what's presented as. Because recovering from suicide requires rewiring your brain, rewiring your behaviors, changing everything you encounter, all the stimuli, encountering your triggers, and reframing them somehow, some way. It involves so much of the brain. Another statistic from the National Institute for Mental Health states that there were twice as many suicides, 44,193 in the United States, as there were homicides, 17,793. There were twice as many suicides in the United States as homicides. And homicides we hear about a lot about. Again, with me living in Chicago, that was one of the biggest things I heard about before I moved here, was the homicide rate, was the crime rate, was the violent injury and violent crimes rate. But I never heard anything about the lost voices. People that are twice as likely to get lost by suicide than lost by homicide. Never heard about that. And I don't think it's something we hear about a lot. I think, in obituaries, in our language, especially when our language is committed suicide. Because when we say committed says that we had the choice all along. And again, recovering from a suicide attempt requires rewiring your brain, which meant that at the time of the attempt, so much was going on inside of the brain that it wasn't just a choice of committing or not committing. This is brain chemistry, brain biology. With these statistics, it goes to show that we mustn't remain in isolation, because there's so many going through what we've gone through. There's so many who share in our afflictions. There's so many people that have experienced what we've gone through. And we must allow that to connect us to a community instead of isolating us within our own conscience or conscious. We must connect ourselves with our community support, because through the multitudes of voices combined, the shame and stigma attached to suicide recovery and attached to sending support to those affected indirectly or directly by suicide will be both eradicated and eroded.